we have very interesting topics. It's going to be a poster session. So each poster will receive 15 minutes, 10 minutes for the presentation and 5 minutes for the Q&A. I'd just like to remind everybody, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. Please do not type it into the chat box, because if it's in the chat box, we won't be able to see it. But if it's in the Q&A box, we will be able to see it and then ask the speaker to address the questions, inshallah, at the end. The second point that I'd like to mention is don't forget to live tweet. Our Twitter hashtag is on fire, alhamdulillah. So a lot of people are tweeting from the different rooms and sharing their pictures from the presentations and their thoughts and insights and impressions. So be sure to do the same. And please mention room 5, so people would know which room you are from or you are attending. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce our speaker, Al-Bandari Dosari from the University of Western Ontario and Arab Open University. So she has an interesting topic today. So she's looking at learners of 2 typologically different languages. And her topic is called Acquisition of L2 Articles, a comparison of Japanese and English learners of Arabic. So please, Al-Bandari, could you start with your poster presentation?
Hi, thank you for the introduction and welcome to my poster session. So before starting, I'd like to mention that although my academic work focuses on the interfaces between phonology and phonetics, I found something unique in conducting this study from a second language acquisition point of view. Also, this study is still ongoing. So let me start the poster. The poster is about acquisition of L2 articles, a comparison of Japanese and English learners of Arabic. There has been much work done on the usage of the acquisition of the second language articles and the interpretation of definiteness and specificity by L2 learners. Most of the previous studies examined the fluctuation hypothesis, which is a theory proposed by Oyonen 2003. So the idea behind the fluctuation hypothesis predicts that, number 1, L2 learners have full access to universal grammar principles and parameter settings. Number 2, L2 learners fluctuate between different parameter settings until the input leads them to set the parameter to the appropriate value. According to Oyonen 2003, the parameter setting indicate that the definiteness setting states that articles are distinguished on the basis of definiteness, while the specificity setting states that articles are distinguished on the basis of specificity. So, fluctuation here means fluctuation between definiteness and specificity. These studies also investigated L1 transfer, which has been addressed by Oyonen and her colleagues 2008. They found that L2 learners with the article-less languages such as Japanese, Korean, Russian, and Chinese experience challenges when using the right article in the proper context. One of these issues includes fluctuation between definiteness and specificity. However, learners with languages that have articles English, Greek, Arabic, Spanish, French, and German transfer the parameter from their L1 to their L2. So, also, this study have investigated the fluctuation hypothesis on English articles as a second language. However, there is no research considered this hypothesis on Arabic articles, especially from a second language point of view, but see Addiki 2014. So there are 2 main goals in this study. The first goal is to extend the literature on knowledge of the fluctuation hypothesis by examining this hypothesis. And the second is to investigate the role of a transfer in L2 learners of Arabic, whose first language is Japanese, a language that lacks articles, and English, a language that encodes definiteness and indefiniteness. So what is the problem in this study? that I'm going to examine. So, well, we know that Arabic is a language with a marker for definiteness, but not for indefiniteness. The Arabic definite article al is a prefix and it has to be attached to the noun it modifies. Here we have an example of Arabic with a marker for definiteness. كتبت الدرس, which means in English, I wrote the lesson. Al here is an Arabic article, which means the in English. However, there is no explicit indefinite article, or in other words, there is no marker in Arabic for indefiniteness. For example, كتبت درس. No article here in this example because the context or the sentence itself is indefinite. I wrote a lesson. On the other hand, English, articles in Standard English encode definiteness but not specificity. Standard English has two articles using the in definite context and a in indefinite context. For example, I wrote the lesson. This is a definite context, while I wrote a lesson. This is indefinite context. Another important point, Ionen and her colleagues 2004 claimed that the indefinite article a is not marked for specificity and can be used in both specific indefinite context and in non-specific indefinite context. So here we have an example of specific indefinite context, which is I'm looking for a green scarf. So which scarf she or he is looking for? We don't know, right? But it is green. Another example about the non-specific indefinite context, I'd like to get a book about airplanes. So the book here is non-specific and indefinite. We don't know which book he wants or she wants to get. So this is an overview of articles in English. And finally, there are no articles in Japanese. Okay. So this study tries to answer three questions. The first one, does the absence of L1 articles lead to fluctuation in the acquisition of Arabic? Number two, does knowledge of English overcome fluctuation in interpretation of Arabic definite contrast? In particular, are Japanese transferring from the second language, which is here English, or are they transferring from the first language, Japanese? Because most of the Japanese participants in this study speak English as a second language, and also they speak Arabic as a third language. The third question is, does the lack of indefinite articles in Arabic complicate the acquisition process? So, based on the previous studies, it is assumed that Japanese speakers of Arabic will fluctuate between using definiteness and specificity. Number two, according to Bardell and Fogg 2007 and Hammerberg 2001, it is predicted that Japanese learners who have knowledge in English will transfer the usage of the Arabic definite articles from their L2, which is English, to their L3, which is Arabic, while they will face difficulties in the indefinite articles, and those who have no knowledge in English will fluctuate between definiteness and specificity. The third hypothesis is that English native speakers of Arabic will transfer the marking of the Arabic definite article al in definite context, while they will encounter difficulties in the usage of the Arabic indefinite article as they are not overt in Arabic. So, here we have three groups of participants. The first group is English native speakers. It consists of 25 English learners of Arabic studying at the Arabic Linguistics Institute at King Saud University in Saudi Arabia. and the second is Japanese native speakers. This group consists of 25 Japanese native speakers learning Arabic from the Arabic Islamic Institute in Tokyo. And the third one is 20 native Arabic speakers. Their ages are from 19 to 45. Both language groups, which is English and Japanese speakers, are at the advanced level. So here we have the tasks. We have 2 tasks, and before conducting the experiments, I'm going to ask the participants to answer a questionnaire. It asks about basic demographic information. So the first task is a preference task. Learners will be asked to read a short scenario, then decide between 2 options, one with article and one without article. All the short scenarios consists of 20 Arabic short scenarios. They are divided into 4 sections, and each section consists of 1 definite and specific sentence, 1 definite and non-specific sentence, 1 indefinite and specific sentence, and 1 indefinite and non-specific sentence. The second task, a sentence completion task. Participants will be given 21 sentences and asked to complete a sentence in Arabic with definite or indefinite interpretation. 7 of each type were generated. 7 definite sentences, 7 indefinite sentences, and 7 destructors. The 21st sentences were randomly ordered. For example, the first 7 sentences have included an equal number of definite and indefinite sentences, and infused by 2 or 3 distracting sentences. All the tasks were written in Arabic orthography. The participants were given 40 minutes to complete the whole tasks, and all the 3 groups will do the test online. As I said earlier, this study is ongoing and the results are expected in April 2021. So contributions, this study will shed light on who have the capability be able to accurately differentiate among Arabic accurately concerning definiteness and specificity. The findings also will add to the empirical literature. And finally, this study will contribute to our understanding of the acquisition of articles in Arabic as a second language. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a very interesting talk, and alhamdulillah, it was short and sweet, and I very much look forward to your results, inshallah. Do we have any questions from the audience? Please type them in the Q&A box. Any questions for Al-Bandri? No questions? Okay, if we don't have any questions, then we would like to thank you so much, Al-Bandri, for presenting your poster. And we wish you, inshallah, all the best on your future research endeavors. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
All right, so our next poster presentation, are you ready? Noura?
Yes.
Could you please share your screen?
Yes, sure. Yes, please.
Right. Yeah, okay. So so our next speaker is Noura Dosari from Al Faisal International Academy. Her topic is going to be about the utterance fluency between native and non-native speakers. So you have the floor, Noura. Could you please start your poster presentation?
Yes, please. Thank you for your introducing. And just I want to mention that it's from Imam Muhammad Ibn Saud University. Okay. And welcome everyone. Firstly, I'll introduce my topic. My topic is about utterance fluency relationship between native and non-native speakers, temporal measures. The study investigated the English utterance fluency relationship of non-native speakers and native speakers with respect to Skehan's framework of temporal measures, which are articulation rate, number of silent pauses, mean length of silent pauses, number of repetitions, and number of self-corrections. The first objective of this study are the first objective of this study is to determine if there are any significant differences between non-native speakers and native speakers with respect to articulation rate. The second objective is to explore if there are any significant differences between non-native speakers and native speakers with respect to breakdown fluency, including the number and duration of silent pauses. While the third objective is to clarify if there are any significant differences between non-native speakers and native speakers with respect to repairs in terms of the number of repetitions and number of self-correction. The last objective of the current study is to investigate the overall utterance fluency between non-native speakers and native speakers. So, for the research questions, the study attempts to answer 4 research questions. The first question is, are there any statistically significant differences between English native speakers and non-native speakers with regard to articulation rate? The second question is, are there any statistically significant differences between English native speakers and non-native speakers with respect to number of silent pauses and mean length of silent pauses? The third question is, are there any statistically significant differences between English native speakers and non-native speakers in terms of repairs, including number of repetition and number of self-correction? The last question is, does the non-native speakers group have the same level of utterance fluency comparing with the native speaker group? If not, what are the differences between the two groups' performance? So, the research gap of this study is about the present study attempts to explore and compare utterance fluency between English native speakers and Saudi learners of English speakers, who are the non-native speakers. It aims also to find the similarities and differences between native speakers and non-native speakers in terms of articulation rate, number of silent pauses, mean length of silent pauses, repetitions, and self-correction, to answer the question regarding whether non-native speakers have the same level of overall utterance fluency compared with native speakers. To the knowledge of the researcher, there are areas, or these are areas that are very few studies to date have investigated. Generally speaking, the current study examines the utterance fluency of English native speakers and non-native speakers at an advanced level of proficiency by describing and comparing temporal measures quantitatively, which are speed, breakdown, and repair fluency. A few foreign studies, including one in Arabic, have investigated utterance fluency, and there are gaps in the literature regarding the similarities and differences in oral fluency between English non-native speakers and native speakers. Regarding the methodology, the study sample consisted of 50 female undergraduate and postgraduate students, English native speakers and non-native speakers, who were interviewed in 2 different settings at Imam Mohammed Ibn Saud Islamic University and Khartoum University. The total sample consisted of 50 female participants, comparing English native speakers, or comprising both English non-native speakers and native speakers. The current study provides descriptive statistics for the temporal measures of utterance fluency discussed in the current study. In order to examine the relationship between 2 groups, in the first step, the participant in both groups were asked to fill a questionnaire to check their linguistic background and then interviewed. The second step is, according to the data. The data which are collected will be firstly collected, transcribed, and then analyzed using the PRAT program. It's important to be taken into consideration that this study has followed de Jong's method in measuring temporal measures. Therefore, articulation rate is measured by what? By dividing total number of syllables by speaking time. For silent pauses, pauses starting from 0.25 or higher were identified as silent pauses. Therefore, they were calculated in terms of number and length. Regarding mean length of silent pauses, they are calculated by dividing the length of silent pauses by the number of silent pauses. Number of silent pauses are divided by the number of silent pauses by speaking time. For repairs, number of repetitions are calculated by dividing the number of repetitions by the total speech time, excluding pauses. For the number of self-corrections, they are measured by dividing the total number of self-corrections by speaking time, excluding silent pauses. So, for the result of the study, the first one, regarding the articulation rate relationship between non-native speakers and native speakers, Figure 1 shows what? Shows no significant differences in the production of articulation rate between non-native speakers and native speakers. The second, the number of silent pauses relationship between non-native speakers and native speakers shows that there was no remarkable differences in the production of silent pauses between the non-native speakers and native speakers. For the third measure, the mean length of silent pauses relationship between non-native speakers and native speakers, the figure, which is figure 3, suggested that there was no significant differences in the production of mean length of silent pauses between non-native speakers and native speakers. The fourth, which is the number of repetition relationship between non-native speakers and native speakers, figure 4 indicates that there was a very significant differences between native speakers and non-native speakers. Also, the number of self-correction as almost similar to self-correction, similar to repetition. The figure 5 shows that there was a slightly significant difference in the production of self-correction between the two groups of non-native speakers and native speakers. Overall utterance fluency, this table shows that the results of the independent samples test indicate that the two groups were not significantly different regarding 3 measures of overall utterance fluency, namely number of silent pauses, mean length of silent pauses, and articulation rate. However, the results revealed significant group differences in the number of repetitions and number of silent of self-correction. These two variables, which are number of repetition and number of self-correction, were the only measures that distinguished the two groups. To conclude, the present study focused on utterance fluency and aimed to compare it across English non-native speakers and native speakers to investigate the most important construct of utterance fluency. This study focused in depth on comparing temporal measures. It aims also to answer questions about the similarities and differences between non-native speakers and native speakers in terms of articulation rate and breakdown fluency, which are native number of silent pauses and mean length of silent pauses, and repairs in terms of number of repetition and number of self-correction. The study also investigated whether the non-native speakers group have the same level of utterance fluency compared with the native speakers group, and if there are any differences between the two groups' performance with regard to their utterance fluency. The present study has several implications for future research. It provides quantitative analysis in discussing the different temporal measures of fluency used and issued in previous studies. Also, the results of the studies also have pedagogical implications for second language education and assessment. Identifying temporal measures of fluency helps teachers, examiners, learners, and other members of second language education and assessment understand the concept of fluency, which is difficult to define. Regarding second language education, second language teachers are recommended to explain other factors that play a role in the performance of speech. In terms of second language assessment, evaluators should be concerned with the measure of repetition and self-correction in the evaluation of oral production and include them as an essential measure that reflect the speaker's utterance fluency. Future researchers also are recommended to study larger data samples, which could provide more statistical reliability for the findings of the study. And thank you for your listening. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. That was quite interesting. We have two questions in the Q&A box. If you could possibly answer them briefly, because we only have 4 minutes left.
Yes.
And if you'd like to also elaborate, you can also elaborate in the Q&A box. So I'll just read the first question. Could you please elaborate further on the description of the participants? How many undergrads, how many postgrads, how many natives, how many non-natives?
For the postgrads, they are 25 at Imam University, while almost 20 in Carleton University, they are undergrads, and the other postgrads. They are equals, 25 for native and 25 for non-native. This is for the question number 1. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so question number 2, I think it's more of a comment. Shall we put into our consideration the richness of non-native speakers' first language sounds, i.e. some non-native speakers' languages are having more various sounds than other languages, which will affect the fluency?
According to this study, number of silent pauses, number of self-correction and number of repetition, they are the most important measure that we can distinguish non-native speakers in English, particularly in English, from native speakers.
All right, perfect.
Yes.
All right, so I think these are the only 2 questions that we have. Do we have any further questions? I guess not. Okay, so thank you so much for a very interesting poster. So right now we have finished our poster session. I'd like to remind everyone that the talk in room number 6, the plenary session, will start at 2:15, inshallah. So in about half an hour. We'll come back to this room for the paper sessions at exactly 3:30, inshallah. So at 3:30, inshallah, we'll be starting our second batch of paper sessions. Thank you everyone for attending, and thank you Bandari and Noura for presenting your posters. Hope you have a lovely plenary session, and we'll see you back here inshallah at 3:30.